While the term neurodivergent was first coined in the 1990s, it may not have been a part of your vocabulary until recently. That's due in large part because of social media, with more people using the word to describe themselves.
But what does it mean and how can it impact your life and others? Kristen Walker from the Counseling and Wellness Center of Pittsburgh is here to break that down for us. I've been seeing this terminology everywhere, like we said, all over social media. But what exactly does it mean?
So it's a term, it's an umbrella term that really works to explain the differences that people experience in the way their brain functions or processes information. So, and it's different than maybe what we typically express. That would be neurotypical.
Yeah, it does, as you mentioned, an umbrella term. It seems so broad that it feels like we could all kind of be neurodivergent.
Right.
In many ways, yes.
Yeah.
So does it include like ADHD and autism?
What would be included in this?
So ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dysgraphia, which is difficulty with writing, Tourette's syndrome, OCD, just different ways that our brains will process information. It kind of encompasses all of those.
Yeah. Okay. And so how do you know if this is something that you have? Are there signs and symptoms?
So typically most people, though that's been challenged, I shouldn't say most people, that's been challenged since there's been such a movement with neurodivergency that people are now being identified as adults. Typically it's, at least previously, it was identified in schools. Schools are designed for a neurotypical child. And so students will go in and they're like, I learn differently, or I have difficulty focusing, or I need these accommodations. What we've realized, though, is this encompasses way more people than we had initially thought.
Well, because I was asking, I think this came up in part of our conversation. Could this be anxiety or depression or something that might fall under a mental health issue, but it also can impact the way that we react and our brain functions? So does that mean that you're also neurodivergent if you have any of those diagnoses?
So not necessarily, but it can be impacted by anxiety or depression.
Okay.
There's also a sense of ableism and internalized ableism that happens. So a lot of people, you know, if you start from a very young age when you're about this big and there's a narrative that somehow you're not doing what everybody else does, or that you're wrong, or that you're different, that narrative is going to stay with folks. And that narrative can carry into adulthood, which can result in anxiety and depression and really have an impact on a person's self-concept.
Yeah. Right, that makes sense.
A lot of the conversation around this, I hear people talking about that they have a flat effect, meaning like no matter what happens to them, if they're angry, if they're sad, or something happens in their life, if they're happy, they have the same like facial effect, the same facial, just like they're not smiling, they're not frowning, it's just pretty flat. Do you see that often?
I mean, I think meeting somebody who falls on that more neurodivergent spectrum is meeting one person who falls on the more neurodivergent spectrum. Some people, yes, may have a flatter affect, some people don't. It's often more of an internalized and internal experience than something that's external that you can see.
Yeah, and I say that because people who have that problem, they say that they don't know how to interact with people, or people don't know how to react to them because they don't really show much emotion.
Right, at times.
I do think because of social media, we're hearing this term more, but I also think that there is more acceptance. We're getting away from this stigma that just because you might fall under this category doesn't mean that you aren't an able-bodied person.
Right.
And so we're seeing more of that. There was a question, though, about if this falls under the classification of having a disability.
So in and of itself, no, it does not fall under the classification of a disability. However, some of the experiences that people have can result in having difficulties and life challenges in a disability.
Sure.
Yeah. Right. And so what do you do if you feel like you fall under this umbrella? Should you try and get therapy? Are there any resources for you available?
Absolutely. So if it's a child, accessing your school resources are a really valuable way of starting that process. As an adult, reaching out, we have a lot of neurodiverse affirming therapists, for example, at the Counseling and Wellness Center, who are very well versed in being able to recognize and support people through that process. There are resources out there, I guess.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kristen.
Yes, thank you. If you're interested in the services offered by the Counseling and Wellness Center of Pittsburgh, we will have more information on our website.